welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, bringing you guys some more stories and breakdowns around the NFL and just football in general. Today I got 4 more topics to talk with you guys about regarding the most recent NFL free agency, the combine, and a bunch of other stuff. The first thing I wanted to talk about was Jason Kelce and his impending retirement. There were some rumors around it. There's some new stuff that kind of came out or that I wasn't aware about, and I wanted to bring that up with you guys. Later on in the show, I'll talk about the NFL Combine that's actually starting today and some of the times, information, and who's participating and who's not participating in it, and I'll give my thoughts on that. Later in the show, I'll talk about the NFL and the NFL Competition Committee possibly thinking about changing the kickoff format and just trying to change something about it because we don't see too many kickoffs in the NFL in general, and the NFL wants to do something about it, so there could be a potential switch in how they do that for next season. Before I wrap it all up with the final topic, the discussion on Russell Wilson and his latest comments that he made on the I Am Athlete podcast with former NFL receiver Brandon Marshall. Russell Wilson had some interesting things to say about his career and just his situation right now currently. I wanted to give my thoughts on that and kind of break down what he said to you guys in the last segment of this episode. But before I jump into the chip shot segment of today's episode, I wanted to please just remind you guys to use the tip and donations link with any of the questions that you may have during the show. It's the tip and donations link is running across the ticker below me, and if you're unable to read it and just listening to this episode, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. This makes sure I'm able to see your question in the chat box here to my right, and I can read them on air, interact with you guys with any questions that you may have. It's also a big help for not only this show, but for the network, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you guys could do that whenever you get the chance during this episode. But saying that, I can jump into the first thing I wanted to talk about. The chip shot story of today's episode revolves around the Eagles, again, as I touched on them yesterday in yesterday's episode. Today, it's a bit more of a emotional topic, I guess, for Eagles and Eagles fans just in general, because it's around Jason Kelce, their longtime center. He's been the center for as long as I've been watching football, and he has a special place in a lot of hearts in Philadelphia because of the player that he is, the sort of attitude that he brings, and a lot of people are very fond of Jason Kelce. But regardless of that, he is in the latter years of his career. Before this season, there was already talks about him retiring and how much longer could he keep playing for the Eagles, still being that leader in the locker room and everything. And after last year, how it all ended with the poor end of the regular season and then the bad performance in the playoffs against the Buccaneers there on the road, where it was just sort of like a big culmination, I think, just watching the game of how, their season, what kind of team they were there towards the end, struggling on offense. Their defense wasn't able to hold up against really anybody down the stretch. They lost some pretty bad games against the Cardinals, the Giants, and just offensively, they just never seemed to be in a rhythm after the midway point of the season, and it all culminated in that last game there, like I mentioned. And obviously, without a doubt, because of the way it ended so quickly, there were going to be talks about Jason Kelce and, what his thoughts were after the game. I'm sure a lot of people saw it on any social media that Adam Schefter actually reported after the game, after the loss, that Jason Kelce had communicated it with the rest of his team. He let his teammates know and, everybody else after the game that he was planning on retiring. It wasn't official. He didn't officially say it to everybody, but Schefter reported that was the sentiment. That was sort of the the way it was heading after the game because of, it was just an ugly loss and everything was down and everything like that. And, they asked Kelce about it recently in a recent interview with I actually don't remember who it was with. On the Superfly podcast recently where he was interviewed, and they asked him about it still so many months removed from when they lost and just a few weeks, almost a month now, from the Super Bowl. They asked Kelce again, any updates on your retirement, to which he said, I don't know, I'm trying to figure it out right now. Right now, exploring different opportunities. If I end up retiring, different opportunities if I end up retiring. He said that on the Superfly podcast, and that was according to Brian Fonseca of the New York Post. So he mentioned that, and then he later goes on to say that he's still working out and he's still staying in shape if he ends up playing again this coming season. And, with Kelce, I talked about it a few episodes ago because, of his brother Travis Kelce obviously being in the Super Bowl and everything. Everybody sees Jason Kelce on the sidelines, happy, just as a supporting role, really enjoying himself a lot, watching his brother, just spending time with everybody that he cares about. And in that environment, his fellow teammate, Jordan Mailata, said that he doesn't expect him to come back just because of how much fun he's having. And, he said it in a joking way, but I almost took it as, that's a fair point. Even if it's a joke or not, I thought it was pretty fair because, after a certain point, I wouldn't know because I never played football. I never was in that profession. I would assume that after just a certain point you get with Jason Kelce or anybody, that you start to enjoy the offseason a bit more. It's almost like over the years it starts turning into this greater appreciation of the offseason, almost like a relief that like finally, I'm done with football. I have some good time off to myself, rather than I think at the beginning of the season where you see some of these other younger guys in the playoffs, like C.J. Stroud or something like that, that comes to my mind, where they head into the offseason and then you hear them say, that they'll take a week or two off and then they're going to get right back into it. They can't wait to start playing again. Whereas with Jason Kelce now, I think he's pondering it more, the possibility of playing against next season. He doesn't really want to think about next season too much compared to these other guys. And I think that's just a natural transition of it with any player. I'm sure most players could feel like that when they head into their older years. But that's kind of what connects the sentiment I got with Jordan Mailata saying that, and just Jason Kelce's actions off the field during the offseason. He's been very active, more than I've ever seen him, with just appearing in the Pro Bowls with his kids, his family, at the games, like I mentioned, on various different podcasts. He was on Shaq's podcast, hosting his own podcast, and then just doing a lot more with this media stuff off the field. And that brings me to my second point, which was Michael McCarthy from Front Office Sports reported earlier this month that Kelce actually met with Fox and ESPN to discuss a potential post-playing career in TV. And, later on McCarthy clarified that, these talks were preliminary. They're just the very first initial steps to what could be if Kelce wants to. He could end up not going that route. He has his very successful podcast that he has with Travis, but that was just a report that Michael McCarthy stated that he wanted to throw out there. And for a lot of people that does make sense, like I mentioned, because he's already been in the media space. He's very successful at it because of the personality that you get to know. A lot of people have gotten to know Jason Kelce now as the person through his podcast, through everything you see on social media, that it does make sense. And if Kelce wants to do it, I think it'd be a great opportunity for him. But it all just wraps up into this idea about Jason Kelce that even though he hasn't said it, a lot of people are starting to believe that it could be true. But in the same breath, I think he could play a few more years if he wanted to, maybe at least one more year. I think I'd give him because he is, I want to say 35 years old from when I researched the information, and he's part of that group. The Brandon Grahams, the Fletcher Cox, the Lane Johnsons of the world, part of that Eagles organization where I think they would all love to go out together, but Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham are unrestricted free agents, so maybe the Eagles sign a 1-year deal with those two, get Kelce to come back, and they all ride off together, maybe except Lane Johnson because he's still 33, but those three, Graham, Cox, and Kelce could all do 1 more year together, and I think it would be a big help for the Eagles because of what I mentioned yesterday with a potential lack of maturity being there in leadership with Sirianni and the coaching staff. I think having those guys for 1 more year would make the transition easier to, transition it to Jalen Hurts per se, or an A.J. Brown too, who also says he's views himself as a leader, holding guys accountable. I think having 1 more year with Cox, Kelce, and Graham would help that transition become a lot smoother for those guys to take over. And if they were to just drop it now, I think it'd be very tricky because of the relationship Kelce has with Hurts. I'm not sure if they're looking at center right now because, Jason Kelce's still in a maybe phase. So if he were to just drop it and retire, I think it could be, he might not want to add that other obstacle to jump over for the Eagles to have to deal with. So it's all still at a maybe, but I thought it was interesting just those comments. I didn't even know he was having talks about a potential deal with TV and stuff like that, but it does make sense, and I wanted to bring it up to you guys here and give you guys my thoughts on Jason Kelce because it's a foregone conclusion, but I'm sure it wouldn't surprise anybody that he came back and they all sort of rolled off into the sunset as that core three that the Eagles have had a lot of success with over the past few seasons. But that's, the past. Leading up into the future now, a big step into the future is the NFL Combine, and the NFL Combine officially started today. I'm gonna talk about who's gonna be at the Combine, who's not, which athletes are participating, and just breaking up all the skill positions, all the practices and stuff like that in a few minutes. But I'm gonna send it to a quick break right now, and on the other side of that, I'll bring you the Combine and more information on the breakdown of the schedule and everything like that. So don't go anywhere. That's coming up next.